Amen, 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 amen. So the Torah portion that I want to share with you is called Shmini. And we get to this part of Leviticus in the Torah, the middle book of the Torah. And it's all about holiness, which is cool, purity and impurity, which us moderns, we don't really get. It's about dietary laws that make our B'nai Mitzvah students stretch and stretch in order to find a way to connect to it themselves. And for a lot of us, it just feels archaic. It just feels old. And we have a hard time connecting to it. I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of the pieces that we see in Leviticus, but I think it is just as relevant now as it was those thousands of years ago. And I know you have doubts about it, but I really believe it's true. You see, the writers of Leviticus, in particular this section, among some other sections, you have two themes that are happening. One is about being pure, not clean. Older translations will have this translation for tahor as clean, but I actually think it's pure. Pure, tahara is purity. We also have impurity. Tuma is impurity. If we're talking about something that is impure, it's called tameh. So in the text, you'll see for dietary laws, these are the animals that are tameh, impure. These are going to be the ones that are tahor. These are the ones that are pure. These you can eat, these you can't. But it's not just categories of what you can eat. There's something more that happens. It's about concerns about impurity within their community. And they look at animals, for example, and what are the animals that are impure? Well, the Torah doesn't tell us. We don't know for sure, but if we were to look at other ancient Near Eastern texts, other sources from different parts of the world, we're going to see similar features. And these ancient Israelites had two things that they knew about. One is that contagion spreads. They knew that. They didn't understand germs, but they do understand sickness, disease, and contagion and how it can spread. The other thing they know is they're trying to create a system where we can be the best we could possibly be. And a lot of those animals and birds that are considered impure to eat, it's because they're scavengers. It's because they eat other animals. It's because they eat blood. Now, for animals, that's natural. But for human beings, we are told in the Torah that we can't eat blood. We can't drink blood. We can't eat something that has blood in it. The laws of kashrut, we know that blood is drained because blood is the symbol of the life force. So what's happening in our text then? How do you say to me, Rabbi, this is still sounding very ancient and archaic. We live in Boulder County. We're pretty woke. We have a sense of how to live in this world. Well, I want to say to you that if they were concerned about the spread of impurity, in other words, the spread of something that isn't good for them, the spread of something, not just of what they consume, but also by what they touch, about what touches the things in their home, their vessels, their pots and pans, if you will. This contagion can spread. Now, yeah, I think we can talk about a pandemic, but I want to talk about a different kind of contagion tonight. Things that have been spreading, things that can bring impurity, things that can hurt our society. The impurity that they thought of, if it spread, they felt that if it reached the ancient tabernacle where they would hold the holy ark, that God would remain distant. And if they also understood infection and contagion and disease and illness, that means people also could be distant if contagion spread. So, what contagion is spreading within our communities other than this idea of COVID-19? What other things can bring impurity that can keep us distant from one another and from God? I'm going to say things like misogyny, racism, the tolerance of poverty. I'm going to invite you, what are the impurities that you are seeing spread in our world? You want to put them in the chat? I encourage you to do so. Is it hate? Is it an ideology of anti-LGBTQ plus rights? Disinformation, gun violence, environmental injustice? I think we have lots of things. A lot of us feel overall negativity, apathy, people lying, a sense of distrust. These things are that we see in our chat. I do think that these are things that are impure, not because they are in and of themselves evil or bad, but when something is introduced to create distance from each other, an ability and inability to see one another as a creation of God's grace and loving kindness, then that contagion can break us, can hurt us, can keep us distant. So whether it is idolatry for them or idolatry from us, I see in the chat there's a sense of idolatry for weapons. Not that weapons aren't necessary, but sometimes there's a blasphemy that's connected to it, or even of money. Money isn't bad in and of itself, but how is it that we can create hurt if we raise something above human dignity? So I'm going to ask another question. Tahara is purity. They wanted, whenever something was impure within their camp, they were able to provide a remedy to transform it. And that happened with sacrifice, with a sacrifice to create something sacred. Because remember, sacrifice is about drawing closer to. So if the impurity is going to keep God away from the community, if impurity is going to keep people away from one another, then purity is going to be about bringing us closer together, elevating us as human beings, created in God's image. I invite you again to put into the chat, how do you embrace purity, tahara? What are the qualities that we need to make contagious, like generosity, like human dignity, respect for all? What are the things that you think can be the remedy for all of the pieces that you put into the chat? Slavery to gadgets, hate, hatred towards people we disagree with, worship of money, whatever it is. Tell us, what is it that we want to make contagious? I see humility, deep relationships from Rabbi Ruthie, better role models in our media, sympathy, allyship, the idea of standing shoulder to shoulder and being with somebody. Some activists will talk about, and we shared it a few weeks ago, an accomplice isn't somebody who commits a crime, but is going to do the action and the work. I see tzedakah and protests and having companion animals in our lives. I think that's a good idea. Compassion, acceptance. I want to share a couple of others. I think inclusion is really important. Letting people feel like they could be at the table. Diversity is really important. Acceptance of one another in all areas. But neither of those also are enough. We need to be a place that models belonging. Don't confuse belonging with membership. I'm not talking about membership. I'm talking about homecoming, belonging, being seen, being heard, seen, known. That these things that you're saying are going to be our remedy for the impurities that are contagious. This Torah portion says all of this huge list of things to stay away from and don't do because of impurity spreading. Well, I say let's spread goodness and kindness and love. When we find something that is that tameh piece of our world, that impure piece of our world, let's provide the remedy. Not always anger or canceling. Let's talk. Let's sit. Let's meet. Let's figure out how to create a place of belonging, a place of inspiration, a place of care for others, a place where we can stand on the shoulders of those who came before us to invite God's presence into the midst with love and goodness. And that's on us. That is our task. Ken Yehi Ratzon. May that be God's will.